This is Rob Gray from ASU and PerceptionAction.com. Today on the Perception and Action podcast, my interview with Anne Benjaminse from the Department for Human Movement Sciences at the University of Groningen in the Netherlands. Hi everyone, welcome to the Perception and Action podcast, where I discuss how psychological research can be applied to improving performance, accelerating skill acquisition, and designing technologies. In today's episode, my interview with Anne Benjaminse. Anne completed her PhD at the University of Groningen in 2015. Prior to that, she worked at the American Sports Medicine Institute in Birmingham, Alabama. In the interview, we discussed the role of attentional focus in injury prevention and recovery, using video feedback and VR as rehabilitation tools, and making return-to-play decisions. Hope you enjoy.
Not 10 years ago, I was a child. I was a good boy and you let me go. Now I'm on a talk show.
Okay, my guest today is Anne Benjaminse from the Department of Human Movement Sciences at the University of Groningen. Thanks for taking some time to talk with me, Anne.
Thank you too for the invitation.
Oh, you're welcome. So to start things off, can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got interested in sports science and movement sciences?
Sure. I graduated in physical therapy, my undergrad, and actually during those years I tore my own ACL. And, as a future physical therapist and interested in the human body, this really got my interest. So since then, I kind of started to specialize or to focus on sports medicine and wanted to prevent those type of injuries. Yeah, my career since then has been focusing on approaching or achieving those goals and try to help athletes prevent injuries.
Yeah, so sort of self motivation. I find that happens a lot. Understanding our own things that happen to us and. Yeah, so you mentioned one of your areas is injury prevention, and I know that you touch on this from a lot of different angles. And what I wanted to start off with is asking you about how maybe we can prevent injuries kind of right from the start by the way that we train people and the way that people learn skills. And in particular, what you've been looking at is kind of the issue of focus of attention and instructions and kind of things like that. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I think because the main goal eventually is that we want to have our athletes move safely at the sports field. And I think one of the areas in current prevention programs we can maybe improve is the way how we teach athletes to adopt those safe movement patterns. And I think more traditionally, this has been done with an internal focus of attention. For example, telling an athlete to flex the knee or to bend the trunk forward. However, we think that the retention of learned movement techniques and transfer of learned movement techniques to the field might be enhanced with adopting an external focus of attention, which is thought to more facilitate movement automaticity, which is eventually necessary on the field. And then, for example, you can use an analogy to increase knee flexion, for example, or imagine sitting down on a chair when landing, for example. So with an external focus of attention, you try to provide instructions and feedback that draw the attention away from the body so that the athlete has the ability to pay attention actually to the environment.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Not only does it seem to, external prevents disrupting automaticity and things, but also makes you aware of when someone's coming and might hit you in the side. So I think it makes you more aware of things that could cause you injury than the external environment.
Correct.
So kind of moving on, you've also looked at some tests that we can do, simple tests that we can do to look at who might be susceptible for injuries and trying to predict kind of ACL injuries. I know that's really hard, but can you tell us a little bit about the kind of tests that you do?
Well, for example, in some of our studies, we've applied the drop vertical jump test and scored this with the landing error scoring system developed by Darren Padua. And since this test is also used in screening protocols, we wanted to see if we could have athletes improve the technique used during this type of task. But I think we need to be aware that it's hard to predict injuries. I think it's more about, getting an idea of the current status of an athlete and strength and weaknesses, and then provide coaches and trainers advice on how to target these weaknesses, so to say.
Yeah, and I know that one way that you've been doing that is kind of a very recent study you had come out that I actually talked about a little while ago, the one where you're using this kind of innovative video feedback to kind of help correct technique. Can you tell us a little bit more about that study?
Yeah, the idea is actually to provide athletes with a visual example of either expert modeling to imitate an expert jump landing task, or with self-modeling and provide the athlete with their own best trial so far in order to provide at least positive comparative feedback. And with the overlay technique, we just tell the athlete, okay, this is the target movement, and try to maximize the overlap with the target movement without specifically pinpointing at specific body parts. So you they kind of figure out their own way to match. Yeah. Let them individually explore, how to reach that goal. Exactly. Yeah. No, that's really nice, and I think there's tons of research showing that's the better way to do it than tell them exactly how to move. So are you planning some more studies with that tool, that video tool? We are still using it currently, not a study running, but for the near future, we definitely want to include video examples, one or the other way, to help trainers and coaches really at the field. For example, during a warming up, or nowadays with technology like tablets or smartphones, it's easy to provide those visual examples to imitate. So we really think that at least providing visual instructions and feedback is really powerful. So kind of moving from the topic of injury prevention to recovery, again, you found kind of the focus of attention issues kind of rearing up here too, in terms of doing rehab. Can you tell us a little bit about that work? Yeah, I think what you've been showing as well, that the increase of conscious control during movement after injury is really something that is important to target. Because then within rehab, if you're even providing more internal focused instructions or feedback, they will be even more focused on their own body. So also with athletes after injury recovering, or during their return to sports trajectory, we conducted a study in our research group in a virtual environment. We had athletes first kind of do a step down task in a natural environment, and then have those same athletes conduct a task in a environment which is depicting a street and with traffic lights. So they were really stimulated to focus on what was happening on the screen. And what we saw is that when they were immersed in that virtual reality environment, they demonstrated knee joint biomechanics that were more closer to the control group, to so to say normal athletes, normal movement patterns. Yeah, that was a really nice study. I was just reading that one actually the other day. Yeah, I think that the VR is a really good potential for that, because it must be even harder to get someone to focus externally after an injury, right? Because they're worried about re-injury, and I think that's a real challenge. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So giving them something else, you need much more rich external stimuli, I think. Yeah, definitely. So your basic finding is when you can get people to do these more externally focused, they produce more expert-like movements, more non-injured patterns. Yeah, more natural and then potentially less risky patterns. At like 6 months ACL reconstruction, when they adopted an internal focus of attention in another study, we saw that they moved with a more extended knee. And during this virtual reality, we also saw that was more suboptimal. They adopted more suboptimal movement patterns. So adopting that internal type of focus is even putting them more at risk. So that's why we want them to, again, have their attention directed to the environment, which is also needed when they turn to sports or performance even at the sports field. So I guess one of the final issues that I wanted to ask you about in terms of recovery was the very difficult issue of when it's okay for an athlete to return to play. And I know there's no simple answer for that, but can you talk a little bit about some work you've been doing related to that? Well, first of all, it needs to be a really individualized process and criteria instead of a time-based. And I think a beautiful paper from colleagues recently in sports medicine and from Dingen and Gokler really addressed that it should be, they advise to adopt a multifactorial return to sports approach, including psychological issues, the readiness to return to sports, together with more like objective measures, strength, but also really movement quality. For example, leg symmetry index, it shouldn't be only about the distance someone can jump, but the movement quality is really important, I think, for safe return to sports and decreasing the risk for second ACL injury.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And I've been doing running for a long time, and I think everybody learns the hard way when you try to go back too fast, and even when the thing you injured is fine, but you start compensating in a weird way with your movement, and you end up hurting. Started with a bad right knee, and suddenly you have a sore left hip, right? You get these weird. Yeah. That's a really good point.
Those testing criteria, it's always an issue of debate, or we want to improve, to have valid tests available, but it's really hard. But I think the future is really to try to, include testing in a more open environment where decision making or an anticipation that does more play a role, maybe multi-directional hopping or adding fatigue, and then it really adds, I guess, to the validity. But still, with testing, reliability and reproducibility is really important. But in order to prepare the injured athlete for returning to sports, it shouldn't be just, only strength testing or, single plane testing, for example.
So I guess that, that leads me to kind of where you're moving to next in your research. What are kind of the things that you're currently working on and what you have planned for the near future?
Well, I think for the near future, we're both focusing on, for example, first, still trying to better understand motor learning. What happens when you, for example, add some type of self-control in the feedback that athletes prefer, or in the timing of feedback that athletes prefer, and then see what happens with the the biomechanics during testing, but also really measuring biomechanical loads at the sports field, because there's that's the place where eventually the injuries happen. That's really be really an innovative area. And in addition, really working with the coaches and the trainers to be, to collaborate and see what barriers they experience, and to have them more and more adopt the programs and just have it integrated in their regular warm-up.
I agree. Yeah. That's going to be another, measuring it in real time.
Live, real time, real setting. Yeah.
Because I think we'll find it's quite a different story, right, than what you get in a lab.
Yeah, exactly. Because, we once an athlete has adopted a safe movement pattern in the lab, we're still not sure whether they're able to transfer it to the field. So what I started off with, the retention is important. Are they able to maintain their movement technique over time? But the transfer is also important, and to get insight in how they are able to move on the field.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. Well, I think that's all the questions I had for you, Anne. Thanks for taking some time to talk with me.
You're welcome.
Thanks again for the great discussion, Anna. You can find out more about Anna's work from the links in the show notes. Coming soon on the Perception in Action podcast, does putting an athlete under pressure aid motor learning? This is Rob Gray from ASU. Cheers for now.
Gone through St. Louis.